Good morning, Professor Lebaron. Welcome to our conference. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks to you.
If I may, I would like to introduce you to our participants very briefly, just by mentioning some elements of your rich trajectory and work. Professor Lebaron conducted his PhD at the École des études en sciences sociales under the supervision of Rémi Lenoir. After his PhD, he worked for different French universities, such as for the Université Picardie Jules Verne and the Université Versailles Saint-Quentin on Yvelines. Since 2016 until today, he teaches sociology at the Ecole Normale Spupérieure Paris-Saclay, where he directs the Department of Teaching and Research in Social Sciences. As a visiting professor, he has taught as well in several other universities in Europe, Latin America, and Asia. His work has been widely recognized. In 2011, he received the Médaille d'honneur of the Université Picardie Jules Verne, and in 2022, he was named Chevalier de Palme Académique. And between 2015 and 2017, he served as president of the French Association of Sociology. In fact, it is a real pleasure and joy to have Professor Lebaron with us in this conference, because actually his work has been one of the sources of inspiration of our research project. Professor Lebaron specializes in economic sociology and is one of the prominent figures of the so productive revival of this branch of French sociology during the last 25 or 30 years. Being largely inspired himself as his PhD supervisor by Pierre Bourdieu, he has developed an original approach of economic policies, of sociological study of economic policies, focusing on the social characteristics, institutional positions, and symbolic practices of economic policymakers. Already in his PhD, he worked on the community of French economists and their relationship with science and politics. He initiated thus a series of seminal works on that issue. And in that respect, we may in particular mention his first monograph published in 2000 with the title La croyance économique, les économistes entre sciences et politique, and the book that in a way updated this work 10 years later with the title La crise de la croyance économique. At the same time, Professor Lebaron extended his research on actors of economic policy, in particular working on central bankers. I would like also to mention the works that he has delivered jointly with Didier Georgakis on the social structures of the field of European governance. Being a passionate user of sophisticated quantitative sociological methods, he has also published several books and articles on sociological methodology, as well as on the general principles and notions of our science. In fact, I could continue further this presentation, but in order to save time for the essential, I would like to stop here, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Lebaron. Professor Lebaron, we're really happy to hear on this issue of how can we study economic policies in a sociological way. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Nikos, for the wonderful and very, very kind introduction. I'm really honored to be among you today. Please, can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, of course. I have to make you a co-host.
Thank you so much. I'm ready to warmly thank you. Thank you all for this invitation. It's really a pleasure.
The honor is
for me.
Is ours.
I would be even more happy if I was in Greece, but
next time. I think we can do it the next time.
Yeah. And for the carbon print, it's better, I think.
Normally, you have there now.
Okay, thanks.
You may now share your PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. It's of course quite ambitious, and this is a picture of what, in a sense, economic policy is for me. It's institutions, of course. Here you have the members of the governing council. Today's governing council, or the governing council at the end of 2022. And you have individuals inside the governing council. And you see they are very casual now. They don't wear a tie for the men. There are a few women as well. And you could begin a description, an in-depth ethnographic description based on this picture. That's not what I will do, but we can come back on things around that a bit later. First, I want to stress that economic policies are really, for me, at the center of social life. I don't know if it's the infrastructure of our societies, but for me, it's something like that, in a sense, looks a bit like that. That is something that on which the pillars of our societies, in a sense, are based. Economic policies, that is something that is at the intersection, I will come back to that, between the state, the markets, and a various large amount of very various actors of all sorts. It's a particularly interesting topic for me because I'm interested in all sorts of struggles, symbolic struggles, material struggles, and economic policies are probably the locus, the place of the major struggles in our societies. At various levels, again, it's a multi-level design, of course, multi-level stake, and it implies, again, a large variety of actors, such as political actors, of course, but also intellectuals, economists especially. I will come back, of course, to that. Financial actors, obviously, are very central, if not completely dominant today. We'll come back to that. Industrial, etc., unionists, and so on. All sorts of actors are present in the field, and that's what makes this field so central, is that nobody can ignore this field because all the aspects of our daily lives are, in a sense, impacted by economic policies, changes in economic policies, but economic policies as a structural component of our societies today. I mentioned it. For me, economics especially is particularly important as a subspace, in a sense, inside the space of economic policies, where particular actors, highly qualified, who have credentials in particular matters, and especially have accumulated symbolic capital through their courses, through their education, but also through their professional trajectories, interact not only, I would say, fuzzily in daily discussion, but on the basis of data, arguments, models, science, referring a lot to rational arguments enhanced by various resources taken from science, and especially this particular science known as now economics. So they are particularly central in symbolic struggles. That's why saying that we can analyze economic policies from another point of view, which is a sociological point of view, is already, in a sense, a way to engage in the topic, to commit, saying that maybe economists are not the only ones that can have something to say about that. And sociological points of view or ways of seeing things, of discussing things, and especially reflexivity, can maybe add to the discussion, and so has some political implications, public implications as well. Of course, saying that I will analyze sociologically economic policies, I don't want to say that economists don't have anything to say on that. Of course, I rely a lot on economic studies of all sorts, but also on history, which I think is mostly overlooked and should be much more referred to and used in the analysis of economic policies. So in a sense, if I have to locate sociology in a disciplinary space, I would say it's in between various things, and especially between economics on one side and history on the other. And we are trying to do something else, but not in contradiction with these two disciplines, which have which have many difficulties to interact themselves for various reasons, which I will not comment. Epistemologically, I would say that sociology is, in a sense, a way to combine historical and an economic approach in a broader, more encompassing, more inclusive way of analyzing economic policies. So I will evoke theoretical elements, historical elements, of course, even if it will not be, of course, very in-depth, some methodological implications and even practical implications at the end. And my presentation will be very simple. I will just try to discuss the notion of field of economic policies with a plural. What is it? What is a field first, but what is a field of economic policies and how to study it? So with some methodological implications on that. And then I will present you a rather recent case study on the Governing Council of the ECB, which is published. There is a new one, which is still unpublished, which I will evoke. I will give you some of the results of the most recent one, which is a sort of follow-up, continuation of this first published study of a particular case, which for me is exemplary for what we can do and the limitations as well of what we do, but which is also a way to open the discussion on a more concrete, maybe, hopefully, at least, basis than to general or theoretical considerations, which are still rather important. Here are a few references, especially as regards the notion of field applied to the economic world. Of course, the Bourdieu social structures of the economy is very important for me because there are many things included in this book, late book in English compared to the surveys on which it is based. But the ideas, in a sense, were developed by Bourdieu since the 60s or even before, and are very, I think, up to date in order to analyze sociologically economic institutions and practices. You have a recent book by Vincent Dubois, which is a collective book actually published in French, unfortunately not yet in English, which has a similar title, Les structures sociales de l'action publique, the social structures of public action, showing that there is a large amount of research now applying Bourdieu's theoretical framework on public policy issues, public action in general, using a large set of methods, including, of course, studies about the field of bureaucracy and European institutions, especially work by Didier Georgakakis, whom you mentioned, Nikos, a few minutes ago. There is also this appropriation of the notion of field by other traditions, especially in the US, and especially at Berkeley with Neil Fixstein, and the famous book with Doug McAdam, A Theory of Fields from 2012, which I think is important in order to, to discuss and in a sense balance the implications of such or such notion of field and such or such ambition that we associate to the notion of field. And finally, I just mentioned a very recent paper that I've written last year and that will be published or maybe is already published. I haven't seen it, but in an international handbook by Milan Zafirovsky. And this paper is centered on the relationships between financial markets, monetary policy, and central banking, which obviously is one of the major topic of my recent studies in economic policies. So first, I want to say something that maybe can sound a bit strange in a sense, for at least for an economist, that is to say that it's for me impossible to present the economic world without putting the state, if not at the center, in the picture. And it has always been the case. There has never been an economy without the state, even the most liberal economy, in a sense, as we understand it, and especially monetary economy, of course. There is even, in a sense, a symbiosis between the state and the economy. I think we can difficultly study one without studying the other. And in a sense, present the one without the other leads to all sorts of unbalanced representations of our reality. That's why I think the field of economic policy, contemporary field of economic policy, but more largely, when extended in previous periods of history, is something like a basic unit of the configuration of societies. Of course, there is in many societies a very central importance of religion. I don't want to argue against that, but I think in close connection to religion, there is always an interaction between state and economy. State of all sorts, of course. It's a very general, basic element. Why? Because those elements, those actors, let's say actors to be more concrete, are interdependent. I think interdependency is the really basic fact of economic systems. And in these interdependencies, I always include public and private actors. And the public-private division for me is really a basic structure of all the economies. Of course, formalized by law, formalized by legal doctrines, but it's, for me, an element, a component, which is at the basis of more or less all the known societies. Of course, we don't know all the societies. We have only traces for many societies. I don't want to enter that discussion. I'm not here trying to do something like Weber or Alan Testa more recently tried to do, that is to have a general picture of all known societies of history. But I think it's an important point to make and to discuss, because you may not agree with that, but I would try to argue that it's a general basic component. Then, to be a bit more precise, I would say that at least from a more recent period, which we can date back to, that's difficult here from a historical point of view, but let's say at least 15th, 16th century, there are monetary policies in a sense. Of course, it's a bit anachronical to use this term, but we have something that look like monetary policy, even far before, in a sense, and budgetary policy, at least in the case of the French monarchy. You see that there is an strong interdependence between the state that needs money, especially to do wars, and the existence of something that will become a central bank, which represents people who can borrow money, we can lend money to the state, and who are decisive actors of the historical dynamic. Okay, so for the past, it's a very, very rapid and very harsh summary, but I think it's important to have in mind that we have long trends of history, and that we cannot think of economic policies without having in mind that nothing is new, in a sense. And of course, historians tend to sometimes to make very ancient issues a bit too contemporary. It's a bit anachronical as well, but there is a line and a trend in which we are inscribed, and I think it's, without being very strong evolutionist, one can say that there are dynamics of evolutions of history, of societies, that have made what economic policies are, and especially when we think of the birth of this particular institution known as the central bank, which is in a sense very mysterious and very complex, and which can only be understood on the basis of history. So now what is important to say is that the non-anachronic notion of economic policy as such, that is with these words, this wording itself, the use of the wording economic policy, dates back from the 1920s, 1930s. That is a period where economic policy based on a new representation of economies, of national economies, emerges and is based on mobilization of macroeconomics, which is a discipline that constitutes itself at that period, national accounts, national accounting, which also will create a system of representation of the economic world, but also of the action of the state. And of course, that's also the period where active intervention of the state becomes more and more legitimate and even central in at least the most developed societies. Usually we say that after 1945, we have a sort of golden age of economic policies with fine-tuning, with macroeconomic policies. And it's true in a sense because it, at the same time, corresponds to the rise, the important rise of the economic components of the state, all sorts of interventionists in all societies, even the most liberal, live an experience of expansion of various aspects of the state. Of course, there are cycles in history, and that's a basic element of the theoretical background that I want to rapidly draw here. That after, of course, especially the fall of the Bretton Woods institution, especially after 71, something very important occurs. That is the wave of financialization, which will, of course, limit and even reverse the process of expansion of various intervention or various modes of interventions of the state, but also, and it's of course probably the motor of the process, leads to a very, very important expansion of the financial sector as an autonomous sphere of valuation, for which the link with the state is becoming more and more complex, and we'll have to see very strongly, we'll have something to do very basically with central banks, especially which since this period onwards will have a more and more important role in the dynamic of economic policies in general. Just a citation to show that even in the liberal period of the 19th century, one can argue that the state, in a sense, is already everywhere, and it has never stopped. Even during the neoliberal period, there are reversal elements, but there are also elements of stability. And in a sense, the large increase of the public sector and the state has not completely reversed and is still an element that precisely will be at the center of the legitimation of the neoliberal agenda. An element also that is important in the neoliberal period, I, of course, use I coined this period as neoliberal because I think it's relevant, but it's a matter of very, very intense discussions, of course, among academics in all sectors of the academy, I would say, history, economics, and sociology, of course, and political science. But what is obvious for everybody is the fact that structural policies have become a major part of economic policy, of course, besides conjunctural policies, that is cyclical policies, macroeconomic policies, and especially monetary and fiscal policies, which still remain until today the basic components of economic policy. And what is complex is the fact that each structural policy, like, say, for example, the policy in higher education, can be seen as an economic policy and is a matter of divides, a matter of struggles between actors, and that leads to a very complex fractal divisions of economic policies, which have not only increased in size, but diversified and complexified a lot, which is, of course, one of the difficulties one has to deal with. That is, simplification may be too frequent when we study economic policies, and especially it's not something that you can say most of the time about historical approach to economic policies, but it's a bit the contrary. It tends to be sometimes too much dived into details and complexity in a sense, but to many economic approaches. And sociology tries to balance these aspects, and to deal with the complexity and the very diversified nature of economic policy today, which is a world in itself, and a modeling ambition, which is also very important. Now we can say that every public action with a budgetary component is constituted with, there is a symbolic construction process behind that, of course, as a part of economic policies. And we see that and we live that in the academy, where we have become economic actors, obviously, at least actors of economic policies, obviously. And it's particularly obvious for me because I'm in an institution which is located in a hub that has been described as the new French Silicon Valley, which is, of course, devoted to innovation, to competitiveness, which has as keywords this idea that one should develop research in order to become more and more competitive and make Europe the most dynamic and competitive economy in the world. It's really obvious for actors of the Plateau de Saclay that they are seen as economic policy actors, even though they are researchers in very fundamental disciplines like mathematics or physics. Of course, it's not completely new. It was already present when we speak about militaro-industrial complex in the 50s in the US or even in France, and even already. But this economic policy dimension has become stronger with the idea of structural policy and structural reform, which has become a general motto of institutions and actors. So to sum up, we have a rise of state intervention, which has enlarged the field, but also which has complexified it a lot. It is also a process of cyclical variations, which are very strong. So according to the moment and the place, you can see reversal processes, you can see movements in one direction and in the other at the same moment. So you can have processes of neoliberalization and at the same time comeback of more classical state intervention. Today, even in France, it's very particular, maybe the situation, but renewal of the wording around planning, for example, which had been abandoned and which had made a comeback with the idea of planification ecological planning, at the same time of very tough structural reforms, as we see with the reform of the retirement system today. So it's really complex to analyze and needs to be both more encompassing, global, and very detailed in the perspective. And I think that's one of the difficulties. That's why I think collaborative work, collective work is really necessary in order to understand the complex dynamics of all those processes. And it's even, I would say it's even more necessary when we want to model those processes, because simplified modeling now doesn't work anymore. It's clear. Too simplified modeling is insufficient to understand the complex nature of economic policies in our world. Just to finish with this element, this big picture, in a sense, I'm sorry, it's maybe too abstract or too general, but I think it's good as an introduction before coming to the very detailed case study. But I think we can summarize the neoliberal cycle in which we are still in, because we are still in it. I think it's, an element that we can discuss, a factual element that we can discuss, at least in Europe, in the Eurozone, but also in the US, obviously, and in most of the countries. It's a combination, it was at least a combination of monetary orthodoxy, budgetary austerity, and structural reforms in the sense of financial liberalization. First, that's a big element at the center of the picture is financial liberalization, which had led us to the world as we know it. In a sense, we're in a world that has been performed by liberalization, and all the work on performativity points to this. It's really a theory effect in Bourdieu's sense. We live in a world that is financialized to a large extent due to financial liberalization. But of course, we have also trends related to privatization, which remains, even if the pace can vary according to the countries and the moments, and like also can be reversed in some cases that we see, for example, in some sectors in the UK or elsewhere. We are still in this period. We're still in this dynamics point. And this dynamic isn't over, but you can immediately argue, but monetary orthodoxy doesn't seem to be here anymore. And that's a big problem, which I will try to address in the what follows.